ladies and gentlemen of the media. I'm tempted to apologize to you for calling you out on a Friday afternoon at 4:30. Uh, However, I will instead thank you for gracing us with your presence. We know that in the time that we are existing and the anxiety caused by the failure to have some closure put to the date set for elections or setting an elections date uh, would necessitate your presence this afternoon. Now, you'd appreciate as well that I figure many of you would have been present this morning at a press conference hosted by the Chief Elections Officer and other members of the Secretariat at the Guyana Elections Commission in the presence and company of the chairman of the commission. Now, there are several issues that were raised there that I believe need clarification, and it is our hope this afternoon to provide that clarification as best as we can at this forum. Now, one of the first things that I heard the CEO opened with this morning was that they have always been, they've been meeting since the day after the no confidence motion and are really waiting for the go-ahead from the commission. Now, in as much as I hear that being bandied about, both in the media and in meetings that we've attended, I need to make this lucidly clear. We did not have a meeting of the Guyana Elections Commission subsequent to the holding of the successful passage of the no confidence motion in the Parliament until the 22nd day of January 2019, a month and a day afterwards. Now, why I find it a bit difficult to swallow that the commission, the Secretariat had met prior to that meeting of the 22nd was because it took so long to get definitive answers from the Secretariat after we met on the 22nd. One would have expected, at least us commissioners going to that meeting, expected to be presented with several options, several plans, etc., as it relates to the holding of elections. Members of the media, you'd recall that immediately after the meeting of the 22nd, we reported that the Secretariat was directed to present to us certain options, etc., and 24 hours were given for that, so that we can have a meeting on the 25th of January to meaningfully discuss these issues. We did, in fact, receive those documents on the 25th. On the 24th, the timeline here is very important, so I'd want to have it clear for you. We met for the first time on the 22nd. We had the documents presented to us on the 23rd, and we met again on the 24th. On the 24th, when we met in the morning hours of that Thursday, we poured over several options as are presented by the Chief Elections Officer of his own volition. And the first option that was presented was the holding of elections on or before the date that the validity of the list expires. Now, I'd want to pause here and deal with this list that we have. Lots of information is being presented in the media about the validity of the list and the need for some sort of registration to improve that list somehow. The laws of this country provide how and when a list must be refreshed. Our list must be refreshed by claims and objections periods, and after a list is refreshed in that manner, that list used to be valid for 3 months. Pursuant to a legislative change made by the National Assembly of this country in 2018, the period of validity of lists extended from 3 months to 6 months. The last date at which we had a list certified was the 31st of October 2018. As a consequence, that list would have been valid for a period of 6 months, which expire at the end of April 2019. There is no need up to the 30th of April 2019, once elections are going to be held prior to that date, for any amendment whatsoever to be made to a list. That list is valid according to law. I also want to deal with this issue of persons being disenfranchised. And some persons have even gone so far to say that their constitutionally guaranteed right to vote is being affected by not having some period of registration. The Constitution guarantees you a right to vote if you are 18 years old, subject to conditions. And those conditions are 2 in number. 1, you must have been at the age of 18 at the qualifying date. And 2, you must be registered to vote at the qualifying date. I said this before, that it is not the responsibility of the Guyana Elections Commission or any other person to go and drag you to register you. You have an obligation to yourself and a civic duty, and one grounded in law, to present yourself for registration. So to now say that, look, I am somehow disenfranchised, I believe is disingenuous. Now, I want to deal with some of these other issues in relation to timelines, etc., that are being proposed in the media, and to the media rather, by the Guyana Elections Commission. The date seems to be, or the number of days required for preparations for holding elections seem to be increasing exponentially on a daily basis. The first option that was presented to the Commission on the 23rd of January, as I stated earlier on, and was discussed on the morning of the 24th of January, was the holding of elections by the constitutionally guaranteed, mandated deadline. That was an option that was presented to the members of the Commission by the CEO. It was labeled option 1, in fact. Later on, we were told that no priority was given to that option, but the fact that it was presented as an option, whether priority or not was given, means that the Secretariat did contemplate the holding of elections in that time. We were later told all kind of hairy-fairy stories about why they could not hold elections in that time. Now, after we met on the 24th in the morning, we adjourned that meeting because there was a complaint by some commissioners that they had only just received the documents and they were unable to make meaningful contributions thereto and so on. We met again at 4:30 that afternoon. That meeting went into the late hours. When we came out of the meeting, it was dark outside. We were unable to come to a consensus because it was clear that the sun dancing had started. Options that were presented as being valid options with absolutely no reservations from the Secretariat to the Commission, you were being told that there were factors militating against the holding of elections pursuant to those options. We ended in a stalemate, and you'd recall that we met again on the Friday with the whips, the government whip in the Parliament as well as the opposition whip, at which point we indicated to them that we were unable to come to a consensus. It was after lots of backing and forthing, cajoling, almost demanding at some points, that we were able to come to the position last Tuesday that we should be presented with work plans with all of the options that are available for the holding of elections. I believe time has overtaken some of the issues that we've had in relation to the presentation of those options. Suffice it to say that we received those options after lunch. I believe it was 12:30 or something on Monday for discussion on the said day. We discussed those options on Tuesday in part. But when you look at those options, and I want to dissect those options and the work plans that are presented in relation to those options. When you look at those options, you see that they are padded heavily. For example, when you look at the options, you see something like, mind you, when we were presented with documents on the 23rd, I believe it was, we received requirements for training and so on. And in those documents, the first document we received, as abhorrent as it was, that they required 90 days to do training. By the time the work plans came out on Monday, you see that those 90 days shifted to 105 days. Now, 15 days in a normal course of things may be a small period. But in this circumstance, when the Constitution has presented one option to the Guyana Elections Commission, that is to hold election within 90 days. And I want to make this point very clearly, because I hear it being made out there, and it is not within the domain of the Guyana Elections Commission to speak about any extension about holding elections. That is a function of the National Assembly, and which requires a special majority, which I wouldn't get into, because that is not within the domain of the Guyana Elections Commission. It is the responsibility of the Guyana Elections Commission to be prepared and to hold elections when it is called upon to do so. And it is not, say, as Gonraj or Ropes and Ben or some one of you calling for elections to be held at the time. The Constitution which gives rise to the Guyana Elections Commission, the Constitution which gives rise to the function of the Commission, which states specifically what we are required to do, that Constitution, that very document, has said what the timeline is for holding of election, that is 3 months. So to come and say that, look, we can't hold elections and that there is some provision for extension, I believe is hogwash. Now, the time for training, as I said, was expanded from 90 days to 105 days. The very commission, the very secretariat, which came in the first instance and said, look, we require 90 days, came back very quietly and said, look, we need 105 days now. I shudder to think what next week, what number of days will be required. It obviously shows that, and I keep saying this all the time, dilatory tactics are at hand. Now, in relation to the period between nomination day and elections day, nominations day by law has to be 32 days, no later than 32 days before the holding of elections. 2 plans were presented to us on the 23rd. 2 options. The first option spoke of nomination day being 35 days, and there was a breakdown as in it relates to the tasks that have to be completed within the 35 days and the relevant duration of those tasks. That information was contained on a document. There was a second option presented for our consideration, and that presented a 40-day option between nomination day and elections day. And that, of course, because of the extra 5 days, provided a little bit more wiggle room here or there in relation to that period. When these work plans were presented to us, you see a period of 55 days now being slotted in there for between nominations day and elections day. It is opposite to note at this point that in 2015, nominations day was held on the 7th of April, 2015. You can go, you can check it. It is not my ipse dixit. Those are dates that have been reported on. It was held on the 7th of April, 2015. You also recall that elections was held on the 11th of May. When you calculate that, 34 days elapsed between nomination day and elections day, and that was sufficient in those circumstances. Now, the final issue that I want to raise before I hand over to my colleague. The Chief Elections Officer this morning in his opening salvo spoke about the grouses raised by stakeholders subsequent to the 2015 elections that were contained in an elections petition. An elections petition, the least I say about that is better, but an elections petition which has been languishing in the courts for 3.5 years. That very chief elections officer, who by law was named as the respondent in that matter, went to the court and made an application to the court to strike out that petition on the basis that it had no merit. If you said then that that petition as was filed did not have merit, then you are now coming to speak in 2019 about the grouses raised in that petition. I'm not sure that I'm hearing correctly, or I'm not sure that it's making sense to me. But in any event, we have had 3.5, almost 4 years, in excess of 3.5 years, almost 4 years, to remedy those issues, that the Chief Elections Officer is saying that were complained about in 2015. Now, if you did not take the initiative or take the relevant steps to remedy those issues in that period, now you're going to attempt to flagrantly violate the prescriptions of the Constitution in relation to the holding of elections by relying on such issues? I think not. At this point, I will ask my colleague to deal with some of the issues that he has, and then we'll respond.
Well, thank you, Sis. I'd just like to say that I'm happy that Sis started out with the issues relating to the Constitution in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Guyana's Constitution, in my view, provides for expedient circumstances to resolve governance issues, that is, having a government in the circumstance of a no confidence of the House of Assembly, the Parliament. In these circumstances, and I want us to focus on the word expedient, 90 days are prescribed. It means that the Elections Commission must, at all times, in any 90-day period, be ready for elections. And Say spoke to some issues, and I've seen something about them getting ink and stuff like that, sensitive items they call them. But we just came out of elections. We just came out of elections where over 8,000 persons were trained. We just came out of elections where ink was at hand, so-called sensitive items. I said at our last meeting on Tuesday, when this business about they got to check on the ink, they got to do this and they got to do that, that these things should have been checked on, and we should have had the questions as to their availability since December 22nd, when we heard that they had the first meeting in respect of elections as a consequence of the no confidence vote. For them to come now and saying that their issues of procurement of non-sensitive items is such a big problem is dishonest, disingenuous. These items could be produced and could be gotten in a week. I'm talking about the ink and the stamps and those things. In fact, they exist in some measure, and I said to them at the conclusion of the meeting we just had, you just got to call the Elections Commission of Jamaica or Barbados or Trinidad even to get some from them. If you can, if you want 1,000 bottles of ink or whatever. It's a non-issue. Red herrings. My biggest worry, and Lowenfield says that he hasn't been given information to move or to do anything. The truth and the fact of the matter is that they moved. They moved on December the 22nd. And I think they had meetings up to Christmas Eve day in respect of doing things for the holding of the elections in the 90-day period. And then suddenly they seem to have come to a stop. There was no further activity. I was calling at that time for meetings of the subcommittee because we heard that the chairman was sick, and we had to take that on advisement. But in any event, to help and to push along the process of holding the elections, we wanted to have the subcommittees meet. This wasn't allowed for. They weren't open to it. They weren't facilitating us. And then we did have the first meeting on the 22nd, I think it was, of January. I have here the work plan for the general and regional elections of 2015. At that time, when the elections were called, we were presented with this document. Almost right away when we went for the first meeting after when they went for the first meeting, they were presented with this document. This is the first occasion where we were not presented with the work plan for an election by GECOM, as we required. This is the first time that you had to be worse than a dentist or something to be trying to extract this document from them. And the only reason I could surmise for this kind of behavior is that this is a tactic in GECOM, unfortunately, which goes along with a bigger strategy out there to delay the holding of national elections as is constitutionally mandated. And this is, for me, an extremely serious issue. The Constitution does not contemplate that you would have no government, that you would just have ministers sitting around there acting, and I'm seeing now in the papers being accused of doing things which ought not to have been done. So I have a serious issue with the behavior of GECOM. We spoke about the extent of time for training, which morphed from an extremity of 90 days to 105 days within a week. They keep saying that you have to train teachers and you have to train more people. We have pointed out that the work for the general elections is much simpler. The training materials is of a simpler format, and it could be imparted quickly, particularly to those who were just trained 2.5 months ago for regional elections, the local government elections. And people just needed to be refreshed and upgraded, and even for those who may be new to it, that based on the documentation that there is existing, it's not a difficult thing to impart. They argue that they need several 9 or 12 or more weekends with the 90 days to do this training. We said you could do it in the afternoons, up into the evenings. They said that their people now are mostly teachers. But I don't know if teachers have a block or a lock on this process. But I know if we wanted to do this, teachers would get time off, and they could get days in the week, clear and free. I think some of them are even getting clear days now to do matrimony things, or to go at the Sirpot and other places, but it can be done during the week. That the training can be imparted to these people, and the training materials are much simpler, much simpler than for local government elections, and we can't presume that the teachers are so dense that they can't pick up on what is required in terms of learning what is there. They're making that assumption that you need to have 90 days to train these teachers, mostly teachers they say, to do the work for the polling day staff and other activities for the elections. We do not have the option of finding results beyond March 19th or 20th in respect of elections. I see that the chairman himself was there. We were not invited to this press conference to give any other opinion, which would have been a fair thing to do, and which would have not left us with the opportunity of having to come here this afternoon to rail against it. But if the chairman was there, and it is stated in the Emerald Waves that he refused to answer questions relating to this matter, and his CEO, or the CEO is sitting there and saying he hasn't been given an order, which is a strange thing, because by right and by his position, he should have been moving since December 22nd, and he should not have come to stop and then to behave like a zombie, that he has to wait to get ink and all of those things. There was more than sufficient time to get those things. But the chairman is the chairman and has a vote. And if there is an impasse, 3 on one side and 3 on the other side, and it comes to a vote, it's for the chairman to vote. And one would think that it is passing strange that the chairman hasn't called for a vote or allowed the discussion to proceed to a point where you could have a valid vote. But he sits there, and the man next to him, the CEO, is saying that he hasn't been given an instruction. And every week, last week, one of the commissioners on the other side said he didn't have any time for the whole of the week to come and have a meeting of the operations subcommittee, which is the subcommittee responsible to agree and approve, get a consensus on the logistical and other arrangements to hold these elections. So a whole week passed. And then we're having another week pass now, where we are unable to get people to come to meet to get a decision on this matter in the very formal way in which the Secretariat is now suggesting that it wants a decision. The Secretariat's business is to prepare for the elections. CEO Lowenfield's business and duty is to prepare for the elections in terms of the procurement of logistics, through logistics, and for the training of persons. And given the expedient nature of our circumstances, it is for him to request of the Ministry of Education and other places to give those persons time off, to train those persons that he would need in adequate and sufficient time to have elections done on March 19th. That is his duty. It has nothing to do with the commission itself saying that a particular date in itself or nomination date in itself is a particular date. It has nothing to do with it. His duty is to have elections ready for in 90 days. The only thing that we have to get involved in is to give the nomination day, suggest the nomination day otherwise, and to approve the issues in relation to the procurement of the ballot papers. Nothing else as far as I'm concerned. In my view, the first problem is that GECOM is failing in its constitutional mandate. And that involves us too. But we are failing because there are machinations, and I say it is either deliberate or out of fear or threat somewhere, to not have elections done in the constitutionally mandated time. There's no other explanation for it. Every other thing that has been thrown up is a red herring or red herrings. They were presentations, and Lowenfield himself raised some of the issues, says refer to them, in respect of persons not being able to come on to the list, and it, as was said, issues related to the 2015 elections. He himself raised those issues now for a matter which he attempted to have blocked or heard in the courts. So our problem is this. We have a constitutional duty. We are unable to fulfill it. I believe there are actors in GECOM itself who are deliberately going along with a bigger strategy of delaying the elections and creating the opportunities, in my view, for greater problems as we go down the road. And we have to say, too, perhaps giving advantage to one side or the other, which is wrong in itself. But GECOM senior staffers are either deliberately or vicariously or through fear being threatened or told that they must not move. And this zombie-like behavior that you're seeing them going on with, that they can't move for things which they normally would have moved, and to get ink on all of those things, and to resolve simple problems like the period of training. Training, when we looked at it, when I looked at it, in fact, at the most, I thought could be done in 32 days. Given the fact that people were trained, most of the people were adults. We had just come through local government elections. We had one in 2016. Many of these people have been repeatedly trained in elections. So it's no rocket science to it. So I think that GECOM has to bear a heavy responsibility in respect of this matter, and I hope that all records and information will be preserved in respect of this matter, because whatever the outcome is, I think it's necessary that a commission of inquiry be done into this happenstance, into this event, into this behavior of GECOM, beginning from the 22nd of December 2018, with respect to fulfilling our constitutional mandate of having elections on March 19th, 2019.
Now, at the last, I just want to touch on two final issues before we field some questions. At the last meeting, last statutory meeting held on Tuesday last, as is customary, the CEO presents a report from the Secretariat. And it was under that head that this issue of a requirement or a go-ahead from the Commission to start preparations was raised again by the CEO. I took that opportunity to inquire of the CEO what is necessary to start preparing. He gave examples for like procurement of some supplies, putting some logistics in place, and the like. Out of an abundance of caution, I inquired how prejudiced the Secretariat would be if those steps were taken and an election was not held. And his answer was he will not be prejudiced because the reality is ink doesn't spoil and seals don't spoil, and even if ink has an expiry date, it is not as, well, God forbid we don't have elections for another 5 years, but ink has a shelf life, and in the period that an election is contemplated next, either by the passage of the no confidence motion or after 5 years, ink could not spoil. Those preparations, in the long and short of it, would not go in vain if an election is not held. That is the plain reality of it. And then the spanner was thrown in the works in relation to funding for all of this. I had reason to remind the CEO and by extension the Commission, because all of us were present there, that the Guyana Elections Commission is as what is called a Schedule 3 agency. It is contained in that Schedule 3, which makes it a direct charge on the consolidated fund. It is not a budget agency that causes it to require some sort of approval from any ministerial authority, etc. And it begs the question, are we, and when I say we, I mean the Guyana Elections Commission, is the Guyana Elections Commission going to be starved of resources, particularly financial resources, for the holding of elections as they are constitutionally mandated to do? Lastly, on this issue of the active list that I spoke about earlier on, you hear all kinds of aspersions now being cast against the validity and applicability of that list. That list was used last in 2018. To use common parlance, you didn't hear a coup from any stakeholder in relation to the validity or otherwise of that list. That very list, in a refreshed form, was used in 2016 for the local government elections. The same thing. No complaints. That list was used in 2015. And I want to make this point very clear. Never in the history of elections in Guyana since the return of democracy and free and fair elections have we been in this position where we have had an active list at the time that an election is necessary. You'll recall, historically in 1992, there was a delay of years in order to have a list ready. In 1997, you had to have a refresher of the list in terms of claims and objections, etc. 2001, 2006, 2011, 2015, same thing. Local government elections 2016, that list was refreshed. That list was refreshed in 2018. But I make that point to say that the requirement for refreshment of that list was only because it did not have validity at the time, and the requisite validity, legal validity, at the time elections were called. In this case, at the time that the Constitution dictates that we should have an election, we have a valid list according to law. And we should remember that and act accordingly. That being said, we'll field questions from you now.
The CEO noted this morning that on January 22nd, he asked for approval. You said that approval was never put to a vote. Generally speaking, who is it that is required to put a suggestion to a vote at the Commission? And on the day of January 22nd or February 4th or the next statutory meeting, are either or both of you willing to say, yes, go into operations mode?
I think we said so.
From the 22nd of December, it was my view that we should have gone into operations mode. And I kept using the old adage of Confucius in the commission that the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago. The next best time is now. I said that ad nauseum in the commission. On the 22nd of January that we met, the thrust, at least from myself and colleagues, was that we should go into operations mode. That has been met with objections, and those objections have been as recent as Tuesday last, as I just narrated. Because now issues are being raised about the funding for the commission, for the secretariat to go into that elections mode, that preparations mode.
But just returning to the question itself, generally, what is the procedure at the commission? Who puts a suggestion or whatever to the vote? Who will call and say, okay, we had...
Any member of the commission can ask that it be put to a vote. And I can tell you that it was not done. Why? I can't give an explanation for that.
Let me just say that, in my view, at the first meeting we had in January, we did say, go ahead and procure these materials, the ink and the stamps and all these other things. At the subsequent meeting, we were surprised to hear, well, we were surprised in the first instance to hear that these things weren't there, and we asked, well, if you need so many bottles of ink or whatever, tell us how much more you need and go and get them. I was under the distinct impression from the discussion that that would have been done, that it was a simple matter. At the next meeting, we heard that, oh, we haven't been given a go-ahead, and we're still waiting for a go-ahead. And then it got into the realm of stalemate. The fact of the matter is, and I thought I'd try to point this out, the procurement of ink and these small things, they talk about Coleman lamps, which you're supposed to have in any event in the stores in adequate numbers for elections, along with the batteries and simple things. The last time we spoke, there was no discussion or objection or them saying that they didn't have money to procure those things, procure the ink and the lamps and the batteries and those things. There was no problem when it was discussed first, but suddenly at the last meeting, an objection was being raised that, oh, we don't have money for elections. We have money for house-to-house registration. And one person was saying he would object to any money being used for procurement as such. We have to keep the money for house-to-house registration, but go again for monies for the elections. The fact is the matter is that previously, even at the most recent elections, we wired money, we moved money from one account to another account for various purposes. And the overriding issue is not house-to-house registration. It is the procurement of materials to do the elections process. But underlying all of it is an unwillingness to go ahead with fulfilling the timeline required for elections on March 19th. This is the problem. That GECOM has been undermined in some quarters and contaminated in respect of this issue. That is why the delays are happening. This is why people would suddenly say that, oh, they can't meet. Like there was one occasion just last week, I think, where I said, well, let's meet 8 o'clock tonight. Somebody says, well, you can't meet, he's doing something else. Let's meet 10 o'clock tonight because it's urgent. Can't meet. Then we say, well, we have to meet before the week is out. Then a commissioner says, no, he can't be available for the whole of the week. He has other meetings planned. And so the question was asked, well, what could these meetings be that would trump a meeting that determines a constitutional issue? And shamefacedly, there was no answer. But this is what is happening. This is what is happening. No, I'm not giving any names, no.
No.
So you say who was
You can go and ask. You can ask the other commissioners. It's neither of us and it isn't Shadi.
No, I want to, not to tame your enthusiasm, Jara. I was under the impression that coming out of the last meeting, that the CEO had the go-ahead to
Yes.
prepare, which includes requests for financing from the Ministry of Finance. So to hear today that it is being said that that go-ahead has not been given is a little perplexing to me.
Commissioners, can I ask, is it true that the Secretariat needs a mandate from the Commission to operationalize elections? If that is true, has that green light been given either by consensus or by a vote at the Commission?
I will want to say yes, that the Secretariat does require a mandate from the Commission to proceed. There are, however, I want to say that conditionally, because there are some things that the Secretariat does as of course that does not necessarily require the imprimatur of the Commission. That being said, there has obviously been delays for all the reasons that we've stated here hitherto about the holding of the giving of that permission. However, I was under the distinct impression, and I'm like I said a second ago, I'm perplexed now to learn that the CEO is saying that he did not receive that. I am under the impression that on Tuesday last, we gave that go-ahead. You can proceed, and even in light of the issues raised about funding, that the first thing that you need to say, well, we're going ahead and the first task is to request funding from the Ministry of Finance.
Could you be clear? I'm just trying to find out whether there was a mandate given to the
The
Secretariat.
mandate was given, in my opinion, on Tuesday last.
By way of what? A vote or consensus?
Consensus.
By consensus.
By all, like,
By all consensus
There was no
meaning,
objection.
consensus meaning
Are there-
all the commissioners present as well as the chairman.
And before that, one half of the commission would have also given that mandate? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
how? Was it in writing? Did you say
By
begin?
suggestion, we're saying that you should have been started, you should have started preparation from the get-go. But now that we have meeting, why have you not started preparations? We've been asking that question all the time.
Okay, sir, I'm a little mixed up here. You're saying that there was a consensus
On Tuesday last.
on Tuesday last?
Yes.
Meaning all government representatives, all opposition commissioners on the commission?
Yes.
Agreed.
Yes.
That you should start here?
Yes.
But this doesn't match with what the PPP has been calling about the delay tactics and the calls by Vincent Alexander for house-to-house registration and all these things. So if they're making these calls outside, why inside they would say you should have been...
Because I prefaced what I said earlier on about preparations for elections by narrating the interrogatories that I've given to the CEO. Recall me saying a second ago that I inquired from the CEO what prejudice he stands to suffer, what prejudice the Secretariat stands to suffer if these preparations are commenced, but an election is not held. And the agreement was that there is no, his answer was that there was no prejudice to be suffered. What happens if you buy ink and you don't use it for the election tomorrow? It doesn't expire the next day. What happens if you buy seals for an election today and it doesn't happen today? It doesn't mean it can't happen tomorrow. So as a consequence, it was against that backdrop that the understanding was that there is no prejudice to be suffered by the Commission if we prepare.
Sir, what didn't come out here this afternoon was now that the PPP knows that going forward, GECOM is saying that it cannot be ready for election before the constitutionally mandated period.
GECOM is not saying that.
GECOM is saying that at this morning's press
They
conference
need
that
105 days.
They're not GECOM. The
Go on,
commission.
ask your question.
No. GECOM. No, I heard what Lowenfield is
Yeah.
saying. Lowenfield represents the Secretariat. I'm not sure who held the press conference as far as I'm concerned, GECOM will only pronounce on that matter when all the commissioners would have sat down and voted on the issue. Lowenfield cannot go by himself and say that he can't be ready because it needs 105 days. It does not need 105 days.
But that is the position of the CEO, who has the constitutional power.
Well, he should have been operationalizing it since December the 22nd.
Are you saying that you're disregarding completely what has been said by the CEO this morning?
I am disregarding completely this notion that elections have to be held in 105 days. That's my personal position. I'm disregarding it.
Is it the
He
position
can't,
of the
listen, I can't speak for the PPP, and we can't speak for...
You're speaking on behalf of the PPP.
No, we're speaking as two other commissioners of GECOM. We never said we're speaking on behalf of the PPP. Let me disabuse your mind of that. I am saying here, I hold the view that this business, that elections can only be held in 105 days, we do not agree with. We too here, and I think Ms. Shadik too, that is the fight we've had all the time. Because it was 90 days and then it jumped to 105 days. It is for the PPP to decide in its own wisdom what it wants to do arising out of this situation. I am saying that that position which the CEO said today is not GECOM's position. The CEO is not a commissioner. The commission is the chairman and 6 persons. And until those 6 persons and 7 persons in total would have pronounced on the issue, one way or the other, it is not GECOM.
So you're saying that he's rogue at this point?
No, did he jump the gun basically? Because
He's rogue. If you're
if
saying
I go with what you're saying,
If
Mr.
you're
Ben,
saying before the
the
decision
fact
of
that
I'm
the,
saying,
no, the fact
I am
that
saying,
the chairman didn't decline to really say anything, is that reflective of what you're saying, that everybody needed to vote on this?
well, the
before we come
chairman,
to
the
decision?
chairman is an old judge and jurist and all of those things. He probably knows why he was silent. Lowenfield is not authorized to speak on behalf of the commission on this matter because there was no vote. There was no consensus. We did not meet and vote on the matter. So he can't say that.
Well, Commissioner Gunnar just said that there was consensus to operationalize the holding of elections. So help unconfuse me.
No, I said, and I stand by that, that we had consensus on the operationalization of the Secretariat for the holding of elections.
The operationalization,
You mean starting preparation?
Starting
start the
preparation.
issues, getting the ink. Look, on Tuesday, let me say it, and I have a picture here, which I was surprised at. They started cleaning the ballot boxes. They had some dirty ballot boxes, 25 each, 25 sets in each thing. So probably about 300 or 400 or more there. They were only starting to clean them on Tuesday. You had people under the shed cleaning the ballot box. I have pictures of it here. These are issues which should have been dealt with since then. Also, they had taken out and spread out under the shed the training materials for national, general, and regional elections. It's Tuesday when they started to do anything in terms of handling the materials and so on. These are issues which would have been dealt with since the 22nd of December, along with shortly after giving us the spreadsheet and the Gantt chart for the operationalization of elections. We can't proceed without these documents and without agreeing with them. What they wanted us to do was to proceed beyond issues related to achieving elections on March 19 and discuss other scenarios, which we weren't prepared to do when we heard it moved from 90 to 105 and we can't make the date and all of those things. We couldn't agree with it. The 3 of us are on this side.
All right, what happens now if one side doesn't agree? What happens now? You're saying it could be done within the 90 days. They're saying 105
No,
days.
I am saying...
No.
I'm saying it could be... No, I want...
You're saying it could be done within the 90 days.
I'm not saying that.
He's saying
I'm
something
saying
else.
training in itself, which is 90 days, could be done in 32 days.
Yeah, but, all right, I'm getting that. What I'm saying is, you're saying the time that he put forward is not necessary. It could be done in a shorter time.
Exactly.
In a nutshell.
Yes.
Right? All right, so one side probably will agree and one side will not agree. What happens next? That is the issue. This is what we want to know now. What happens next?
You advise me, if you have 6 on one side, 6 on the other side, and a chairman, what ought to happen?
Mr. Raymond Cummings, based on what I'm hearing from the discussions going on, there seems to be a reluctance by the Secretariat to operationalize the preparations for elections.
For a particular date.
Within a particular time.
For a particular date.
Within a particular time frame. The constitutionally due time frame.
Exactly.
It would seems to me then, based on what I'm hearing, that their constitutional mandate that GECOM, that the Secretariat has, is not being adhered to.
It's breached.
It has been breached. Is there any legal redress that can be taken against these persons who seem to be willfully, based on what you're pointing out, willfully creating a breach in their constitutional mandate, and therefore could lead the country into a state of a constitutional crisis as a result? Because this is a serious matter which we're dealing with. This is not people's opinion and whether you like it or not, or protests, this is a serious matter where the country can be taken into a constitutional crisis. Is there any legal redress, legal action that can be taken, one, to compel them, and two, if they don't and the country gets to that stage, to deal with them after the fact?
Well, that's a matter we'll have to discuss with the legal persons, whether we ourselves as commissioners, I think Commissioner Sharik had taken a resort legally as a commissioner against the commission. She lost in the last local government election. But that's a matter for the...
Unfortunately, because we find ourselves as part of the GECOM collective, we ourselves may be subject or can be subject to litigation in relation to the dereliction of our duty in holding elections and being ready to hold elections in the constitutionally mandated timeline.
But every other constitutional post holder, if they don't carry out their duties in keeping with the Constitution, could be sanctioned.
I'm happy to be sanctioned in this matter.
That is why
I have no problems in being sanctioned.
We stand at prejudice of being so sanctioned as well.
But then could you take action to safeguard your own self in terms of being sanctioned? Because you're right now, as you stand, you're exposed to risk.
Well, Mr. Cummings, I want to make this very clear. Our vindication will be the contributions that we have made, both internally within the commission and publicly, as we are doing now, in relation to the actions and demands that we have made for the commission and the secretariat to be ready for holding of elections in the constitutionally mandated timeline.
So there are minutes for all these meetings that will be...
Of course.
Reflect all that.
Of course.
Yeah, but in any event, I don't mind being sanctioned in this matter. Anything which brings greater light and exposure, both nationally and internationally, to this matter would be extremely helpful for the future governance of the country. It couldn't be that a constitutional agency is flagrantly putting itself in a position of violating the Constitution.